Introduction: The Echo of Iron. Hello, and welcome back to The Silence. Tonight, we travel back to a time when the world was covered in a shadow of iron. We look at Germany during the Second World War, not just through the maps and battles, but through the secrets hidden in the concrete bunkers, the whispers in the silent forests, and the fractured minds of those who lived through the madness. This is a journey of 40 chapters, 40 echoes of a past that still haunts the earth today. These are stories of a regime that tried to build a 1,000-year future out of steel and blood, only to leave behind ruins and mysteries. Close your eyes, let the cold weight of history settle around you, and listen to the stories that were never meant to survive the smoke. Fact 1. The Ghost of the Maginot Line. When the German army moved towards France, they encountered the Maginot Line, a massive, impenetrable wall of underground forts, tunnels, and heavy guns. The world expected a long, bloody siege, but the German strategy was not to break the wall, but to ignore it. They moved their tanks through the Ardennes forest, a place so dense and hilly that the French believed it was impassable for modern machines. Like a silent phantom, the German blitzkrieg emerged behind the line, turning the world's strongest defense into a useless monument of stone. The soldiers inside the forts waited for a battle that never arrived at their front door. It was a victory of imagination over concrete, proving that never in war, the greatest walls are often the ones built in the mind. Fact 2. The Enigma Silence. In a small gray building in Berlin, a machine was clicking rhythmically. It was the Enigma, a device of such mathematical complexity that the Germans believed its codes were impossible to crack. Every day, the machine's internal rotors were reset, creating trillions of possible combinations. The Germans trusted this machine with their most secret plans, thinking their voices were invisible. They did not know that across the sea, in a quiet place called Bletchley Park, a group of silent geniuses had built a brain of their own to listen. This was a war of numbers and electricity, a battle fought in total silence. For years, the German high command spoke into the void, unaware that their every secret was being recorded and translated in a language they thought only they understood.
Fact 3. The Schwerer Gustav, the Iron Giant. The German obsession with size and power led to the creation of the Schwerer Gustav, the largest rifled weapon ever used in human history. This railway gun was so massive it required a small army of 2,000 men just to operate and protect it. Its shells were the size of a car and could travel nearly 50 kilometers to crush a city. When it fired, the very earth shook as if a god had struck it with a hammer. Yet, this giant was a prisoner of its own weight. It could only move on special double tracks and was a perfect target for planes. It was a symbol of a regime that believed absolute power could be built out of steel, forgetting that the bigger the giant, the harder it is to keep it standing in the storm. Fact 4. The Wolf's Lair, Wolfschanze. Deep in the Masurian woods of East Prussia, hidden under layers of concrete and thick forest canopies, lay the Wolf's Lair. This was the secret headquarters, a city of bunkers where the sun rarely touched the ground. For over 800 days, the most terrifying orders of the war were signed here, in the damp, cold silence. The bunkers had walls 8 meters thick, designed to survive the end of the world. It was here that the dictator became a ghost, living underground while his empire burned above. The Wolf's Lair was a place of extreme paranoia, where the trees were wired with explosives, and the air was heavy with the smell of wet cement and dying dreams. It stands today as a ruin, a concrete skull in a silent forest. Fact 5. The Me-262, the silent scream. In the final years of the war, a new sound appeared in the sky, a high-pitched, terrifying scream that had no propeller. It was the Messerschmitt Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter. It moved so fast that Allied pilots thought they were seeing a ghost or a machine from another planet. It was a miracle of engineering, a piece of the future thrown into a dying past. But the Me-262 was born too late. There was no fuel to feed its hungry engines and no experienced pilots left to fly it. It remains a haunting image of the war, a silver bird of prey sitting on a dark runway, beautiful and deadly, but ultimately paralyzed by the collapse of the very world it was built to protect. Fact 6. The Atlantic Wall. Stretching from the snowy cliffs of Norway to the warm sands of the Spanish border, the Atlantic Wall was a desperate attempt to turn a continent into a fortress. Millions of tons of concrete and steel were used to build thousands of bunkers, gun batteries, and obstacles along the coast. The German command believed that no army on Earth could cross this barrier of fire. But on a single morning in June, the wall was breached. It turned out that a wall is only as strong as the people behind it. Today, the ruins of the Atlantic Wall still sit on the beaches of Europe, half buried in the sand, like the bones of a giant sea monster that died waiting for an enemy that eventually found a way in.
Fact 7. The ghost ships of the U-boat fleet. Beneath the dark, cold waves of the Atlantic, the U-boats were known as the Gray Wolves. They were silent hunters that could strike without warning, turning the ocean into a graveyard of ships. Life inside a U-boat was a nightmare of cramped spaces, the smell of diesel, and the constant fear of the depth charge. Out of 40,000 men who served in the U-boat fleet, 30,000 never returned. Their ships became iron coffins at the bottom of the sea. Even after the war ended, some U-boats were whispered to have sailed to the furthest corners of the Earth, carrying secret cargoes into the fog. They remained ghosts of the deep, silent reminders of a war fought in the crushing darkness of the abyss. Fact 9. The Amber Room, the Vanished Treasure. Deep within the chaos of the war, a treasure of unimaginable beauty disappeared. The Amber Room, an entire room made of amber panels, gold leaf, and mirrors, was stolen from a palace in Russia and taken to Germany. It was the eighth wonder of the world, a glowing masterpiece of warm stone. As the war ended and the bombs fell, the crates containing the room vanished. Some say it was burned in a fire. Others believe it remains hidden in a secret salt mine or a flooded bunker. The Amber Room is the ultimate ghost of the war, a golden dream that was swallowed by the gray reality of defeat, leaving behind only legends and empty basements. Fact 10. The Hitler Youth, the Stolen Childhood. In the final days of the empire, as the professional armies crumbled, the regime turned to its children. Boys as young as 12 were taken from their homes, given oversized helmets and heavy weapons, and told to defend the ruins of their cities. These children were raised on slogans and songs, taught that their only purpose was to die for a cause they didn't fully understand. They fought with a desperate bravery that shocked even the most hardened soldiers. It was the ultimate tragedy of the war, the burning of a nation's future to save its past. When the silence finally fell, these children were left in a world of rubble, their childhoods erased by the iron shadow of the state. Fact 11. The Horton Ho 229, the Stealth Ghost. Years before the modern world saw stealth bombers, two German brothers built a flying wing. The Horton Ho 229 had no tail and looked like something out of a science fiction movie. Made mostly of wood and charcoal to absorb radar waves, it was designed to be invisible to the eyes of the enemy. It was a radical vision of flight, a machine that defied the physics of its time. Only one prototype survived the war, a silent wooden bird that never got the chance to change the course of history. It remains a mystery of engineering, a glimpse into a future that the German Empire dreamed of but could never reach. Fact 12. The Peenemünde Secrets. On a lonely island in the Baltic Sea, a group of scientists were playing with fire. Peenemünde was the birthplace of modern rocketry, a secret base where the line between science and madness was blurred. Here, the first objects made by human hands reached the edge of space. But this progress came at a terrible price. The island was a target for massive bombing raids, and the work was fueled by the suffering of thousands. Peenemünde was the cradle of the space age, but it was built in a cradle of war. It reminds us that the path to the stars was paved with the cold, hard stones of a world at war with itself. Fact 13. The Volkssturm, the People's Storm. As the enemy reached the borders of Germany, a new army was created. The Volkssturm was a force made of old men and young boys, people who should have been at home by the fire or in school. They were given old rifles and simple anti-tank weapons and told to hold back the tide. It was a desperate, hollow gesture by a dying regime. These men, with their gray hair and trembling hands, stood in the streets of their own towns, waiting for the end. The Volkssturm was not an army of conquest, but an army of shadows, a final, tragic breath of a nation that had run out of soldiers and out of time. Fact 14. The Bunker of Silence, Führer Bunker. Deep beneath the garden of the Reich Chancellery in Berlin, the final act of the war took place. The Führer Bunker was a complex of cold, cramped rooms where the leaders of the empire spent their last days. Outside, the city was being turned to dust by thousands of shells. But inside, the air was still and thick with the smell of death. In this concrete tomb, the maps on the tables no longer matched the reality of the world. Orders were sent to armies that no longer existed. It was the heart of the empire, but it had become a hollow shell, a place where the lights finally went out on a 1,000-year dream that lasted only 12. Fact 15. The Bismarck, the sunken pride. The Bismarck was the pride of the German Navy, a massive battleship that seemed invincible. It was a floating fortress of steel, designed to dominate the Atlantic, but its reign was short. After a legendary hunt across the cold northern seas, the Bismarck was cornered and sunk. Over 2,000 men went down with their ship, disappearing into the dark, freezing water. Today, the wreck of the Bismarck sits 3 miles down in total darkness, an iron ghost on the ocean floor. It is a monument to the pride of an empire that believed it could rule the waves, only to be swallowed by them. Fact 16. The Night and Fog Decree, Nacht und Nebel. There was a terrifying order known as Nacht und Nebel, night and fog. It was designed to make people disappear without a trace. Those who resisted the regime were taken away in the middle of the night, their families never told where they went or if they were still alive. They vanished into the fog of the system, leaving behind only empty chairs and unanswered questions. It was a weapon of psychological terror, a way to erase the very memory of a person. This decree turned the state into a monster that lived in the shadows, proving that the most frightening thing is not a known enemy, but the silence of the unknown. Fact 18. The Fall of Dresden. Dresden was known as the Florence of the Elbe, a city of art, music, and beautiful architecture. It had little military value, but in 1945 it was turned into an inferno. Thousands of tons of firebombs created a firestorm so hot that it melted stone. The city was erased in a single night of fire and wind. This event remains one of the most controversial chapters of the war, a moment where the lines between justice and revenge became blurred. Dresden became a symbol of the total destruction of war, a beautiful dream that was turned into a nightmare of ash and silence in just a few hours. Fact 18. The Werewolf, the Phantom Resistance. As the war ended, whispers spread of a secret resistance group called the Werewolf. These were supposed to be elite fighters who would stay behind enemy lines and continue the fight from the forests and ruins. The plan was to turn Germany into a land of permanent ghosts where the victors would never be safe. In reality, the werewolf was more of a propaganda myth than a real threat, but the fear it created was real. It shows how a dying regime tries to use fear as its final weapon, promising a war that never ends, even when the soldiers have already laid down their arms.
Fact 19. The forced labor bunkers. Across Germany, massive concrete structures called Flakturm, flak towers, were built. These were giant fortresses designed to protect thousands of people and shoot down enemy planes. But these towers were built by the hands of thousands of forced laborers who lived in terrible conditions. The towers were so strong that some of them still stand today because they are too expensive to destroy. They are gray, hollow giants in the middle of modern cities, silent reminders of the suffering that was poured into every cubic meter of their concrete. They are monuments to a time when human lives were treated as nothing more than fuel for the machine of war. Fact 20. The Nuremberg Silence. After the guns stopped firing, the leaders of the fallen empire were brought to a courtroom in Nuremberg. Here, for the first time in history, the world tried to judge the crimes of a state. The men who had moved armies and signed decrees of death sat in wooden chairs, listening to the evidence of their own madness. Some were defiant, some were silent, and some claimed they were only following orders. The Nuremberg trials were a moment of cold, hard truth, where the iron shadow was finally pulled back to reveal the broken, hollow men who had created it. It was the beginning of a long silence, a time for the world to try and understand the darkness it had just survived. Fact 21. The Ghost Submarines, the U-234 mystery. In the final days of the war, a large German submarine, the U-234, left port on a top-secret mission to Japan. It wasn't carrying soldiers, but a cargo of the future: jet engine parts, advanced rockets, and 560 kilograms of uranium oxide. This was a desperate attempt to share the Empire's most dangerous secrets before they were captured. However, while at sea, the crew received the news that their world had collapsed. The U-234 surrendered to the Americans, and its mysterious cargo vanished into secret government labs. Some believe this uranium helped fuel the first atomic bombs. The U-234 remains a ghost ship of science, a vessel that tried to carry the seeds of a new age across a dying ocean, only to be swallowed by the winners of history. Fact 22. The America Bomber. While bombs were falling on Berlin, German engineers were dreaming of reaching the other side of the world. The America Bomber project aimed to create a plane capable of flying from Europe to New York and back without refueling. They designed massive, multi-engine giants like the Messerschmitt Me-264. The goal was not just to destroy, but to prove that nowhere on Earth was safe from the iron shadow. These planes were beautiful in their engineering, but terrifying in their purpose. Most never left the drawing board or the prototype stage. They remain a chilling what-if of history, silver shadows that existed only in the minds of men who wanted to turn the entire planet into a battlefield.
Fact 23. The Giant Bunkers of the Hagenau. Deep in the forests of eastern France and western Germany, the Empire built pouvrages, underground fortresses that were like small cities. These were not simple holes in the ground, but complexes with their own power plants, hospitals, and cinemas, all hidden under meters of reinforced concrete. Life inside was a gray existence, lit by artificial lamps and cooled by humming fans. The soldiers lived like moles, waiting for an enemy they often couldn't see. When the end came, many of these bunkers were simply abandoned, their heavy steel doors left open to the wind. Today, they are damp, silent tombs where the walls still echo with the sound of boots that haven't walked there in 80 years. Fact 24. The KDF-Wagen, the people's car. Before the war, the regime promised every German family a small, reliable car, the KDF-Wagen, which we now know as the Volkswagen Beetle. Millions of people saved their hard-earned money in special stamp books to buy one. But as the war began, the factories didn't build cars for families, they built vehicles for the army. The people's car became a ghost of a promised prosperity that never arrived. The money was swallowed by the war machine, and the Beetle wouldn't become a reality for the people until the empire was long dead. It is a symbol of how a regime uses the dreams of its people to fuel its own hunger for power, leaving behind only empty stamp books and broken promises. Fact 25. The Silent Forest of Katyn. Though complicated by propaganda, the Forest of Katyn remains one of the darkest silences of the war. Thousands of officers and intellectuals were taken into the deep woods and executed in secret. For years, the blame was shifted back and forth between empires, while the trees grew over the hidden graves. This forest is a place where the truth was buried under layers of soil and lies. It reminds us that war is not just fought with bullets on a front line, but with silence in the dark woods. Katyn is a graveyard of the elite, a place where the wind through the pines seems to carry the whispers of thousands of men who vanished into the night and fog of a cruel century. Fact 26. The Project Riche, the Giant. In the Owl Mountains of Poland, the empire began its most mysterious construction, Project Riche. It was a massive network of 7 underground complexes carved into the solid rock by thousands of forced laborers. To this day, no one knows its true purpose. Was it to be a final headquarters, a secret weapons factory, or a laboratory for experiments that defied science? Most of the tunnels were never finished and remain flooded or collapsed. Project Riche is a cathedral of madness, a hollow mountain that stands as a monument to the regime's obsession with hiding beneath the earth. It is a place of cold stone and unanswered questions, where the darkness is thick enough to touch.
Fact 27. The blood and soil myth. The regime was obsessed with a mystical connection between the German people and their land, a concept called Blut und Boden, or blood and soil. They wanted to return to a legendary pagan past where farmers were warriors and the earth was sacred. This wasn't just propaganda, it was a dark spirituality that fueled their desire to conquer the living space in the East. They believed they were cleaning the land to make it holy again. This myth turned nature itself into a weapon and a justification for horror. It shows how a nation can be led into the abyss by romanticizing a past that never existed, turning the beauty of the forest and the field into a map for destruction. Fact 28. The Ghost of the Graf Zeppelin II. Before the war, the world was fascinated by the giant airships, the Zeppelins. The Graf Zeppelin II was the sister ship to the famous Hindenburg, a silver giant that could float silently over cities. During the early days of the war, it was used for secret electronic spying, listening to radar signals along the coast of England. But the age of the airship was over. The regime ordered the giant ships to be dismantled for their aluminum to build fighter planes. The silver giants were melted down and turned into machines of fire. The dream of silent, peaceful travel through the clouds was sacrificed to the hunger of the war machine, leaving only old photographs of shadows drifting over the sea. Fact 30. The Midnight Sun, Project Uran Projekt. Germany had some of the most brilliant physicists in the world, and they were the first to discover nuclear fission. In secret labs, they worked on the Uranverein, or Uranium Club, trying to harness the power of the atom. They built experimental reactors in basement bunkers, like the one in Haigerloch, hidden under a church. However, the project was plagued by internal rivalries and a lack of resources. The German bomb remained a terrifying ghost that never materialized. While the world feared a nuclear empire, the German scientists were trapped in a cycle of failed experiments and secret doubts. The atom remained unsplit for them, a power that stayed hidden in the dark while their world collapsed in flames. Fact 30. The Operation Bernhard, the Counterfeit Empire. In a secret section of a concentration camp, the regime gathered the world's best printers and artists for Operation Bernhard. Their task was to create billions of perfect counterfeit British pound notes. The plan was to drop this fake money over London to destroy the British economy. It was the largest counterfeiting operation in history. The notes were so perfect that even the Bank of England couldn't tell the difference. But as the war turned, the fake money was instead used to pay secret agents and buy resources. In the final days, crates of millions of fake pounds were dumped into Lake Toplitz, where they sat in the cold, dark water, a sunken fortune of lies and paper waiting for the curious.
Fact 31. The Secret Police. The Gestapo Shadow. The Gestapo was the invisible eye of the empire, a force that turned neighbors against neighbors and parents against children. They didn't need a large army. They used the power of fear and the whisper. A single anonymous letter could make a person vanish forever. This created a society of silence where people were afraid to speak, even in their own homes. The Gestapo's headquarters at Prince Albrechtstrasse was the most feared address in Berlin, a place where the walls heard everything. It shows that the strongest chains are not made of iron, but of the fear that someone, somewhere, is always listening to your thoughts in the dark. Fact 32. The Stuka Siren, Jericho Trumpet. The Ju-87 Stuka dive bomber was equipped with small sirens on its wings called Jericho trumpets. As the plane dove towards its target, the wind would make the sirens scream with a terrifying, high-pitched sound. This sound had no military purpose. It was designed purely to break the spirit of those on the ground. It was the sound of inevitable death falling from the sky. Over time, the sirens were removed as they slowed the planes down, but the memory of that scream stayed with an entire generation. It was a weapon of psychological terror, a way to turn the air itself into a medium of fear, proving that the regime cared as much about breaking minds as it did about destroying buildings. Fact 33. The Mountain of the Eagle, Kelsteinhaus. High atop a mountain peak in the Bavarian Alps sat the Eagle's Nest, a building gifted to the dictator for his 50th birthday. To reach it, guests had to travel through a long tunnel and rise in a golden elevator inside the heart of the mountain. From the top, the world looked small and powerless, a view fit for a man who thought he was a god. But the dictator was afraid of heights and the thin air, so he rarely visited his mountain throne. It remains today as a lonely stone monument above the clouds, a place of incredible beauty that was built for a man who lived in the darkness of bunkers, a throne for a king who was afraid of his own palace. Fact 34. The Operation Paperclip, the Vanished Scientists. As the empire fell, a new war began, the hunt for its brains. In Operation Paperclip, the United States secretly moved hundreds of German scientists, engineers, and technicians to America. Men who had built the V-2 rockets were now building the rockets for the American space program. Their pasts were hidden, their crimes erased by the need for their knowledge. The same minds that brought death to London eventually helped bring life to the moon. This was a silent bargain with history, a reminder that the line between enemy and asset is often as thin as a piece of paper. The secrets of the empire didn't die in 1945. They moved across the ocean to build a new world.
Fact 31. The Secret Police. The Gestapo Shadow. The Gestapo was the invisible eye of the empire, a force that turned neighbors against neighbors and parents against children. They didn't need a large army. They used the power of fear and the whisper. A single anonymous letter could make a person vanish forever. This created a society of silence where people were afraid to speak even in their own homes. The Gestapo's headquarters at Prince Albrechtstrasse was the most feared address in Berlin, a place where the walls heard everything. It shows that the strongest chains are not made of iron, but of the fear that someone, somewhere, is always listening to your thoughts in the dark. Fact 32. The Stuka Siren, Jericho Trumpet. The Ju-87 Stuka dive bomber was equipped with small sirens on its wings called Jericho trumpets. As the plane dove towards its target, the wind would make the sirens scream with a terrifying, high-pitched sound. This sound had no military purpose. It was designed purely to break the spirit of those on the ground. It was the sound of inevitable death falling from the sky. Over time, the sirens were removed as they slowed the planes down, but the memory of that scream stayed with an entire generation. It was a weapon of psychological terror, a way to turn the air itself into a medium of fear, proving that the regime cared as much about breaking minds as it did about destroying buildings. Fact 33. The Mountain of the Eagle, Kelsteinhaus. High atop a mountain peak in the Bavarian Alps sat the Eagle's Nest, a building gifted to the dictator for his 50th birthday. To reach it, guests had to travel through a long tunnel and rise in a golden elevator inside the heart of the mountain. From the top, the world looked small and powerless, a view fit for a man who thought he was a god. But the dictator was afraid of heights and the thin air, so he rarely visited his mountain throne. It remains today as a lonely stone monument above the clouds, a place of incredible beauty that was built for a man who lived in the darkness of bunkers, a throne for a king who was afraid of his own palace. Fact 34. The Operation Paperclip, the Vanished Scientists. As the empire fell, a new war began, the hunt for its brains. In Operation Paperclip, the United States secretly moved hundreds of German scientists, engineers, and technicians to America. Men who had built the V-2 rockets were now building the rockets for the American space program. Their pasts were hidden, their crimes erased by the need for their knowledge. The same minds that brought death to London eventually helped bring life to the moon. This was a silent bargain with history, a reminder that the line between enemy and asset is often as thin as a piece of paper. The secrets of the empire didn't die in 1945. They moved across the ocean to build a new world. Fact 35. The Ghost of the Hans Joachim Marcel. In the North African desert, there was a pilot known as the Star of Africa. Hans Joachim Marcel was a virtuoso of the sky, a man who flew his Me-109 with a grace that even his enemies admired. He was a rebel who hated the rigid rules of the army and played jazz music in his tent. But even the most talented stars are eventually extinguished by the darkness of war. He died not in battle, but in a tragic accident, his plane failing him over the silent sands. His story is a rare flash of individual color in a world of gray uniforms, a reminder that war consumes the brilliant and the rebellious just as easily as it consumes the obedient. Fact 36. The Red Orchestra, Rota Capella. Not everyone in the heart of the empire was silent. The Red Orchestra was a secret network of resistance fighters and spies working right under the nose of the Gestapo in Berlin. They were artists, journalists, and officers who risked everything to send secrets to the Allies and the Soviets. They lived a life of constant fear, their radios whispering in the night. Most were eventually caught and executed in the cold cells of Plötzensee prison. Their story is a reminder that even in the darkest room, there are always a few souls who refuse to let the light go out, fighting a silent war for a future they would never live to see. Fact 37. The disappearing gold, the Reichsbank mystery. As Berlin fell, the massive gold reserves of the Reichsbank were moved to secret locations. Much of it was found in the Merkers salt mine, hidden among thousands of stolen paintings. But a significant portion of the gold, jewels, and foreign currency simply vanished. Some believe it was taken by high-ranking officers to start new lives in South America. Others think it is still buried in the forests of Bavaria or at the bottom of deep alpine lakes. The Nazi gold is the ultimate ghost story of the war, a shimmering fortune that was born from theft and disappeared into the fog, leaving behind a trail of greed and unanswered questions that still attracts treasure hunters today. Fact 37. The ghost of the Panther, the hidden tank. Years after the war ended, in the quiet basement of a normal house in northern Germany, authorities discovered something impossible: a fully functional 45-ton Panther tank. An elderly man had kept it as a secret hobby for decades. This story reminded the world that the war is never truly over. Its machines and its memories are still hidden in the basements and backyards of the modern world. The Panther in the cellar is a metaphor for the history of the era, a sleeping giant of iron hidden just beneath the surface of a peaceful life, waiting for someone to pull back the curtain and look into its cold, steel eyes once again. Fact 39. The Forgotten Army, the soldiers in the East. When the Empire surrendered in May 1945, hundreds of thousands of German soldiers were still in the East, cut off and surrounded. They became a forgotten army, marching into a captivity that many would not survive. For years, they were ghosts to their families, men who had vanished into the vastness of the Soviet Union. Some didn't return home until 10 years after the war had ended. They returned to a country that had been rebuilt and wanted to forget the past. These men were the living ghosts of a failed dream, carrying the silence of the front lines into a world that no longer had a place for them. Fact 40. The Eternal Shadow, the ruins of Nuremberg. The city of Nuremberg was designed to be the spiritual heart of the empire, with massive stadiums and parade grounds built to last forever. Today, these structures are ruins of overgrown concrete slowly being reclaimed by nature. They were built for 1,000 years, but lasted barely a decade. People now walk their dogs and ride bikes where thousands once marched in a trance of iron and fire. The ruins are a silent warning that the greatest empires are the ones that fall the hardest, and that the only thing that truly lasts is the truth. The iron shadow has faded, but the gray stones remain, watching us from the past, reminding us to stay awake in the light.